So we're going to work with the quadratic formula today, and the quadratic formula is all just based off of completing the square, which is what we're actually starting this with, and just trying to convince you that this formula works. So if you do this problem the way it wants you to, you just leave a little space here, +1, leave a space, set it equal to 0, and then go through the process of taking half of this number squared, so that would be -3, and once you square it, you get +9. So just make sure if you add 9 in the problem, later on you have to subtract 9. And as we start to group things together, we can find factors of 9 that add to be -6, x minus 3. Instead of writing it twice, we can write it once squared. 1 minus 9 is -8. And then from here we can solve it just like we did in the previous lesson, where we add 8 to the right side, we square root both sides, double check my math that 8 would be plus or minus 2 root 2, and then we can finish this and solve for x by adding 3 to the right side, so 3 plus or minus 2 root 2. So if you're interested in class, maybe I can show you where this formula comes from, and it's right here. And yes, you will have to memorize this, where a is the number in front of x squared, b is the number in front of x, and c is on the outside. So in this problem, we have a equals 1, b equals -6, and c equals 1. And remember this answer, because we're going to simplify and show that it's equal. So if we go through this, x equals -b, maybe I should have wrote it again, a equals 1, b equals -6, and c equals 1. Just double check now I have the right things. 1, -6, 1. So if you go through the process, it's -b, so it's 6, plus or minus the square root of -6 squared is 36, minus 4 times a times c, well 4 times 1 times 1 is just 4, all over 2a. Well, if you look at that, we have 6 plus or minus the square root of 32 all over 2. Well, we could do the simplest radical form on 32. Break that down as 16 and 2, 4 and 4. All right, well, that's a pair of 4s. So we're looking at 6 plus or minus 4 root 2 all over 2. Well, if you divide every whole number by 2, 6 divided by 2 is 3, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. Look at that. And leave the radical alone. That answer is the same as what we had up here, 3 plus or minus 2 root 2. Or you can just trust me that this answer always works. And for right now, you might just have this in the back of your mind, but a equals 1, b equals -10, and c equals 20. So as we go to find these solutions, it's x equals -b, so +10, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's 100, minus 4 times a times c, well 4 times 1 times 20 is 80, all over 2a. And if you do that little arithmetic in your head, or maybe you have to figure out the square root of 20, is 4 and 5. Well, that breaks down as 2 and 2 with a pair of 2's. So we're looking at 2 root 5. So it's 10 plus or minus 2 root 5 all over 2. Well, each one of those pieces is divisible by 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And it's all over 1. Yeah. So if you look at all the options, the one that's correct is option 4. And what they're trying to get you to realize is that the quadratic formula also works for factored problems. So if you go back to the way we factored this, whether you do the AC method or slide and divide, 2 times -6 is -12. 12 minus 1 gives you the 11. And whether you're doing the 2x squared plus 12x minus 1x minus 6 equal to 0, It's kind of my scratch work. And you, do your greatest common factors. X plus 6 minus 1, x plus 6. And you figure out that you have x plus 6 and 2x minus 1. Now when you go to solve this problem, because it's going to use a zero product property, you get x equals negative 6 or positive 1/2, which you would have also gotten that as the right answer if you slid and divided. 12 over 2 reduces to 6, and then negate it, and then negative 1/2 doesn't reduce, but negate it. That if you did the quadratic formula using a is 2, b is 11, and c is negative 6, alright, so x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of 11 squared, b squared is 121, minus 4 times 2 times negative 6. Alright, well 4 times 2 is 8 times 6 will give me 48 all over 2a. Well, in my head, I'm just thinking about how 121 plus 48 is 169. The square root of 169 is 13 all over 4. Well, you have two different answers here. Negative 11 plus 13 is 2 divided by 4 is 1/2. And then negative 11 minus 13 is negative 24 divided by 4 is negative 6. And what do you notice of the two answers? They're the same. They are equal. To whether you factored or if you do the quadratic formula. So anyway, you should memorize it. I know I already said that. It will be on the test. And whenever you can, you need to make sure you write it in simplest form. So for instance, if you look at the next one, you might look at that and say, oh, okay, well 3 times 2 is 6, and I can find factors of 6 that add to be 5. It would be 3 and 2, and then just remember to divide, slide and divide. So your answers are going to be negative 1, because remember you have to negate it, and then negative 2/3. Or you could look at that and say, oh, I'm going to use a quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times 3 is 12 times 2 is 24. That's 4ac all over 2a. Well, if you go through that, it would be negative 5 plus or minus 1 over 6. And then negative 5 minus 1 over 6. And if you work that out, you get negative 4/6. Alright, that's that answer. And then negative 6/6. Alright, that's that answer. But if you look at letter B, not factorable. There's only two factors of 13, 1 and 13. So it is not factorable or unfactorable. So you have to do the quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. Well, 4 times 1 is 4 times 3 is 52 all over 2a. So feel free to use a calculator too inside of these parentheses. If you're not very good at doing b squared minus 4ac in your head, there's nothing wrong with doing 8 squared minus 4 times 1 times 13, typing that into your calculator to see you get 12, and then practice breaking down 12, 4 and 3, 2 and 2, because then from there, I need you to simplify still that 8 plus or minus 2 root 3, all three of those whole numbers are divisible by 2, so the answer I need to see is 4 plus or minus, and 2 divided by 2 is just 1 root 3. And that's what I need. Same thing goes with the next one. If you were to try to, slide and divide and factor, there's no, it's either 1 and 10 or 2 and 5. Neither of those work. So you have to do x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times 2 is 8 times negative 5 is a negative, so change that to positive 40 all over 2a. So 2 times 2. So as you're looking at that, it's the square root of 44. I should cross this off because that didn't help me get the answer. But you can break that down as 4 and 11, which does have a pair of 2's. So we're looking at x equals 2 plus or minus 2 root 11 all over 4, but every one of those whole numbers is divisible by 2, so you can just write as 1 plus or minus root 11 all over 2. Notice that I'm not changing the radical once I get there. And then let's see if this last one is, let's see, 4 times 5 is negative 20. Sure, you can break that down, 10 minus 2. And if you're good at slide and divide, you can go ahead and get your correct answer. Just remember to reduce and, so 10 divided by 5 is 2, but you have to negate it as well. And then a positive 2/5. So the benefit to that is you don't have to worry about reducing. Otherwise, you have to do the quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. So that would make it a positive 80 all over 2a. Well, 64 plus 80 is 144, so it's negative 8 plus square root of that is 12 over 10, but then also negative 8 minus 12 over 10. Negative 8 plus 12 is 4/10. There you go, that reduces to 2/5. And then negative 20/10 reduces to negative 2. Anyway, your homework does have the formula on it. It's right here. So right now, make sure you're getting the right answer, but eventually memorize this formula. So that's your homework. Memorize and practice these problems.